Author Douglas A. Burton has identified destabilizing story elements that, when present in film, TV, or other stories, can disrupt it and drive away an audience. A lot of these are present in many of the franchises that we love, but that have tanked over the years. It's Doug's assertion that these story elements can be used to great effect when used sparingly and deliberately, but including too many of them can cause the story to become lost. This is the first pass on this theory, so let us know what you think, and let's help Doug build this out.
I started writing down some specifics, not specific scenes, but specific categories of flaws that exist in all of these stories that have proven to be, over time, either rejected or considered failed writing, or at least not as good as we thought they were when they came out. And so I'm calling these aspects destabilizing story elements. These are things that, as a writer, when you introduce them into your story, you are destabilizing your story on some level. Now, a destabilization in your story is not in and of itself a problem. You can actually base an entire story around a major destabilization event. So it's really how the writer handles it. And secondly, I've noticed that the stories that use these destabilizing elements offset them by tempering them. So a destabilizing element introduces a level of ambiguity, inconsistency, and risks character dilution and decharacterization and story destabilization. You run this risk. That's the issue. So in a world building sense, one of the first ones I wrote down was abstract settings. This is a destabilizing element. When you look in the background, when you ask yourself, where is this character? If they're in this abstract sort of world, that could be destabilizing because you're less fixed on where that character is. The setting is a little vague. And so what the character's doing there and how they're surviving, what the laws of physics are, all of those things simply destabilize the story a little bit because we're disoriented on some level. Whereas if you put the characters in a tavern, a concrete setting, it's stable. That's a stable environment for these characters. We understand it. We recognize the dynamics that are going on. We understand the purpose of this setting. We understand a lot about the setting, and the background, especially in visual medium, gives us a ton of clues. Is this a seedy tavern? Is this a high-scale, hoity-toity type of place? The background tells you a lot of information. The background's part of that world building. So when you introduce characters that are in space, I'm not talking about like spaceship flying. I'm talking about floating in space or in these barren, hard to understand landscapes. Those are abstract environments. We don't really know what's going on there. Even the compound that they introduced in Arcane season 2 here was I guess it was at the edge of Zaun, and it was semi-idyllic, which seemed to be a little bit at odds with the catastrophic events of the world. It introduced a level of abstraction there that weakens the setting. It weakens what the characters are doing there. It's hard to understand how the characters relate. This was a cult, like a utopian thing. We don't really know what's going on here. So abstract settings or backgrounds is a destabilization thing. Magic.
Okay.
Introducing magic.
Just so clarification.
Yeah, give us some examples of that one.
Because at first when you said the abstract setting and world building, the first place that my mind was going was kind of to a story where the world is whatever it needs to be, rather than
it's just an ambiguous.
That's not what you were talking about. You're talking about the Victor floating in space,
right? An ambiguous
visual
setting, right? And a setting that's more ambiguous and undefined and abstract rather than concrete. That, again, it's not a kill shot to the story if you do this. So I'm not saying don't ever do this. I'll tell you what you don't want to do is add multiple layers of this, because the more of these you add, the more you're destabilizing your story, the more difficult it is for the viewer to have a concrete grasp of what the hell's going on in the scene. So an abstract setting. What's that?
Am I correct to say it's like, get close to my microphone. It's like the audience feels less grounded when that's happening?
Yes. In fact, grounded is one of the words I use. It leaves you less grounded. And again, you can make it work, and tons of stories do make it work. And some people might even argue that it worked in Arcane. But again, the issue is there's a multiplier effect here. But you can actually ruin a story. I remember Aquaman, the first Aquaman, they had such ambiguous settings. I was like, they just didn't do their homework on the world building. Much better had they put them in a place that you understood on some level, rather than some ambiguous sea room, in the background, So anyway, that's one. Magic can actually destabilize a story. And I don't want to cover this that much because this is a story based on magic. So the issues become what your job is as the writer is to ground it somehow. So if you're going to introduce an ambiguous setting, ground it by giving us some limitations, some rules, some idea of how things work here. Same thing with magic. You want magic to be limited and you want magic to have boundaries, right? In fact, Brianna, your story, City of Reckoning, there's a scene where they're marshaling their forces, they're entering battle, and then there's a sorcery event that occurs. And it's frightening to all the people on the ground. Sorcery is back. Well, and it's not supposed to be. So sorcery introduced a new level, but sorcery did not take over your story. It was limited. It was confined. It was held to these places. The Force in Star Wars, it has this power, but it doesn't take over the whole story. It's used in very specific ways, in limited ways. That's the writer's effort to ground the magic on some level, to rein it in a little bit. Time travel is a destabilizing story element. You start introducing time travel, you're opening up issues. I put underneath time travel different timelines. You can have a story that has time travel, but no different timelines. Or you can have a story with time travel and multiple timelines. That creates a problem. These are destabilizing because we're less certain about how the world works, right? And we're also a little less certain about how the time travel rules go. And a lot of stories have to spend some time explaining their time travel continuum or the end game thing, which is to say your past can't be your future. Therefore, if you go into your past, it can't be your future, which to me is just semantics. That's not a real rule set. So these are destabilizing aspects.
Well,
multiverses.
Time travel. I mean, I agree. We've talked about that.
Right. We've talked about this.
It's
and again,
there are movies that have done this well, and I think I might have even said this earlier in the discussion. Like we talked about Terminator, Terminator 1 and 2. We accepted as time travel stories, and then also like so that's one way that you can do it. Like another way is a very campy way you can do it, like Star Trek 4. Like we like Star Trek 4 time travel story, but that one works. But then but it doesn't work a lot of the time. It's very difficult.
Well, and how did they ground it? They went back in time to 1987. We know 1987. It was 1987 when I went to the movies to see it. So they went back in time, but I'm immediately grounded because the characters go to a world that's instantly familiar for me. When Kirk walks out into the middle of the road and almost gets hit by a cab, it's like, what are you doing? And the cab swears at him and Kirk tries swearing poorly back at. It's funny because I understand the context. So I was grounded in Star Trek 4 by the timeline they traveled back to. It was beautiful. And Star Trek did not continue to reuse time travel in subsequent films. So they contained it.
They contained it. It was, but whereas like when I was like reading different Reddit threads and things like that, this came up, and a lot of people had problems with the plot holes that potentially came with the time travel in this. And and we're having intense discussions on it. I did kind of skip them, and I was like, we don't have that kind of discussion on this show about like what is the particular ramifications of the time travel and whatever. But what I was taking note of, which I think is what you're bringing up here, is that the fact that now people are having 1,000 comment long discussions on Reddit threads trying to figure out the time travel
because the story was destabilized. So they're going onto Reddit.
Your story.
Right. They're going onto Reddit to try to solve it. Is this good? Is this bad? They're disoriented in the story on some level.
Yeah.
Because the writers destabilized the story. Now, some people can argue that they destabilized it effectively. Others can argue they destabilized it. Now I'm lost. But it destabilized the story.
But if you're having these comments about what does this mean? And is this a plot hole? Is this not a plot hole? Did this work? Yes, then there's a problem.
It's a destabilizing element
for your story.
Right. And what's interesting is good stories tend to either focus on the destabilizing element in and of itself. Like Terminator, they didn't just throw time travel in. That was the centerpiece. It's like, we're going to tell a story that's going to destabilize you as a viewer because it's involving time travel. And we're going to really get into this. We're going to focus on it. We're going to build lore around it. The whole story is going to center on it. Back to the Future, same thing. Because they focused on it, we're grounded in it. We understand they've contained it, and we enjoy it. So because they focus the story on it. Other ones where they introduce it, like Star Trek 4, where it wasn't a part of the stories before, and now it is, they still had to rein it in so that it doesn't take
it's in
over
that
the
one
story.
movie. It's in that one movie. It's in that one. Well, I mean, there are some other time travel stories, but that story is one movie.
Right. For example, Star Trek First Contact wasn't as successful because when they went back in time, it's to the 21st century. I'm still a little disoriented because it's a different timeline. I don't know anything about post-apocalyptic. Was it Oregon or I forgot? So,
but also they introduced time travel very late into Arcane.
Well, right. Well, and that's another thing.
They didn't center me on that from the beginning of season 1. It's not even season 2 if we're talking about different stories between.
So that's
seasons,
what I'm saying. Maybe they didn't center us on this destabilization.
I was surprised it was the time travel story. Oh my god! Okay, we got time travel now in this story.
Right. So they didn't center us on
only the fans knew that was coming.
Well, and maybe they did.
That's Echo's thing, right? Yeah, but that's
my point is,
you have to know that it should say.
Yeah, my point is to discuss this in general terms, that this is a destabilizing element. This is a destabilizing element for story. And the ways it has worked in the past is by centering on the destabilization or containing it in a way that the audience can understand. Those tend to be the two strategies that work. I call it anchoring. Anchor it.
I like that.
Give us an anchor. Timelines, which kind of is a kitty corner. It's different, but it's a kitty corner destabilizing element. Multiple timelines. Multiverses. This is a very destabilizing force. It can work. It worked in Spider-Man, No Way Home. It didn't work so well in Multiverse of Madness with Doctor Strange. And people are starting to hate multiverses. It's really worn out its welcome rather fast. Hollywood thought they found the answer to everything with the multiverse. And now audiences are like, don't do it again. Don't do a multiverse. Oh, and the other kitty corner to multiverses are variant characters. This is very destabilizing because now you're diluting characters. Each version of the character you create gets less and less interesting over time, and they become more and more meaningless. So, like, I remember watching, what was it with all the Kangs? Ant-Man, Quantumania. There's like 1 million Kangs in the room. And I'm like, this is the bad villain of this new. I was like, I'm already lost. There's too many of them. So that's destabilizing. Variant characters, multiverses.
Okay, so let me comment on that, if I may, quickly. Sure. Yes. So that's also, I agree. Multiverses, I was like, and it's because you didn't use this word, but it's because you're starting to eliminate consequences.
Right.
If you're introducing multiple everythings and multiple characters and everything, that what you're doing in your stories, you're starting to say, nothing has a consequence because there's another universe where that didn't happen and we can go and explore that. And it seems like
the destabilizing element.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
so
yes.
What's destabilizing about magic? What's destabilizing about an abstract setting? Well, all of us in our lives are always in a concrete place. So when you put a character in a non-concrete abstraction, now there's a little wobble because I'm like, I don't really know how this world works. I don't understand this. What's destabilizing about magic? Well, you're throwing the laws of physics out the window for the audience. So they're like, wait a minute, how does this work? What's destabilizing about time travel? Well, time is something it's very stable for us. So when you throw that out the window, it's destabilizing. Multiverses, like you said, consequential action. That's now got me a little like this because now I don't know if anything matters. The next one.
Right. Oh, wait, well, I just want to quickly make an aside. Just to say an example of something that handles that one really, really, really well. Everything Everywhere All at Once. Have you guys seen it yet?
Loved it. I've studied it for the Heroine's Labyrinth.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Yep. Just wanted to make that note. Because that one is very grounded because there's very set rules on like how this works and why and what the stakes are and their personal.
They center the story on the destabilizing aspect.
Yes, and
so it works.
Yes,
and they ground it. They keep a very small group of characters, right? Mm-hmm. You have Deidre Bobidra, which is Jamie Lee Curtis. You have Wayman and Alpha Raymond. You got her daughter. It's a small group that I could kind of understand. Mm-hmm. That's another grounding element. They anchored us by a small cast. So anyway, and that's a great example. Another destabilizing.
Hang on. I'm not quite done yet. So a similar situation to that is I would add dreams.
Oh yeah, I've got more.
Oh, okay.
I got more. Okay.
But when I was saying here, so episode 7, I think it's an interesting paradox, and I think episode 7 of season 2 is something that's interesting to study because, like you said, in the moment, you asked me, "Are you enjoying it?" I was like, "Yes, I'm enjoying it," and I think there are reasons why that episode is very good and why people recall that episode, and it has to do with, and I said this earlier, but has to do with recalling earlier ways of telling the story in Arcane that are centered on characters. They bring us back to the Undercity that we want to see, and all of this, and we get to see that. But on the other hand, so in the moment as I was watching it, I did enjoy it, and certainly there are great elements of that. But I couldn't. But ultimately, I had to reconcile with the fact that nothing that happened there mattered. Now, of course, I think that he was going to. Echo was going to create the device, the Z drive that could destroy Victor or whatever, and Heimerdinger was going to sacrifice himself. But okay, you could have done that not in an alternate universe. You know, you could have structured so you could have moved the consequential things out of the multiverse format, and then in this case, you would have saved yourself a lot of time.
Well, I think
that you could have better used in the story.
Brianna said she would have liked to actually seen Echo and Jinx together. You know, so why don't we go there? That's real. Why? Now, it was emotionally pleasurable watching Echo and Jinx. I got to be honest.
I think it was really good seeing Powder that grew up without Jinx. There was something about that seemed really powerful too.
There was something
that happened. Yeah.
Very satisfying emotionally, even when I watched. Even the second time I watched it when I was really negative, I was like, it's a shame that this is a waste or kind of a throwaway scene in some sense, but it's so good. I even like the slow motion thing they did. They did some artistic stuff there.
The slow motion thing was it was 4 frames a second for his.
I got to be honest, I loved it. The problem is, how does this fit into the story? You destabilize the story to show me this. Why not show me this without destabilizing the story? So, Brianna, and you said in your assessment, I would have actually shown a real relationship develop between Echo and Jinx. That's how you solve it, folks. Do what Brianna said. Do it in a more concrete, grounded way. And now you get the emotional payoff, and you've got an audience that's on board instead of an audience that has to go, didn't I guess that's not as real as I thought it was. You don't want to do that to your audience. You want to deliver for them. So the next one, a destabilizing element, mind control. When you add mind control into a story, you are taking out something that's stable, which is our autonomy on some level. Even if I'm captured and thrown in prison where the culture takes away my freedom, I still have autonomy. I'm limited with what I could do, but I'm going to try to break out of here. Mind control takes that away from you. So when you introduce that, you're destabilizing your audience again, because now you're watching characters lose their ability to respond autonomously, like for real. I'll skip ahead to some other ones. I have like supernatural intervention. You don't want to do that because that takes away the whole effort of the characters. That's also where you get the Deus Ex Machina, machine of the gods, that comes in and solves the problems at the end. A miraculous recovery. This also kind of goes in line with
Snow, anyone?
What's that?
I said Jon Snow, anyone?
Yes. Yeah. So so one of the ones, Heath, you said was it was all a dream. That's on here. If you take an entire scenario and make it a dream, you're destabilizing the story, because what you're really doing is getting out of your story into a dream space before rejoining the story. It can work, but you are destabilizing the story in the process. Hopefully you stick the landing and the story restabilizes. That's the idea, right? You want to restabilize it. I'll skip ahead to some other ones because they're all interesting in and of their own right. So we could actually talk about any one of these probably at length. Unclear power bases, all these other. Anyway, for characters, how this plays, how you destabilize characters in this. Magical conversations. Now, I cannot tell you how many times I have seen this, and it's bizarre. I think it's a writer who is not doing a good job. Star Wars: The Last Jedi had it. They started communicating with the Force. They're face-to-face. They're seancing. They're doing all this weird stuff. Why can't the writers come up with a concrete way for these two characters to interact? Why are you, the writer, coming up with this bizarre, never-before-seen way to communicate? So this magical communication is becoming a new symptom I've noticed, where writers have to invent bizarre ways for characters to interact. And two subsets of this are conversations with non-existent people and monologues with oneself or imaginary people. So why are you wasting our time with a character talking to someone who's not there, or with a character that doesn't exist, or talking to themselves out loud? Now, the monologue works on stage. It's actually a device for theater. It works less well in films. Again, it can work, but you're destabilizing the story when you do this, because a character interacting with no one is almost always less interesting than a character interacting with someone. Character resurrections. This is a destabilizing force because you are removing the consequence of a death.
So many of these have to do with consequences.
Yes. Well, right. Consequences or things that we rely on as human beings with our experience of the world, the writer is going to take that away. Now, again, if you focus on it, you can make it really compelling, because this is like the one thing that's off in the world or whatever. But you do risk losing the audience. There are people that are like, let the character stay dead. This is becoming a thing now. Don't resurrect the character. I saw in the chat they were talking about Jinx, like no body, no death. Correct. But then the scene where she falls has less meaning. They brought Palpatine back in The Last Jedi. Like, you can't just bring all these characters back. Character resurrection is a character destabilizer. Rapid emotionality, another symptom of bad writing that I'm noticing. When characters are just like angry, or they fall in love immediately, or instant lust is happening, or brooding. Jace in this one is just like, it's just always brooding, and there's no people. Bad writers, I think, are mistaking rapid emotionalism or intense emotionalism as characterization. It is not the same. You are compensating for your lack of characterization by showing a character emoting heavily. And this is becoming a problem that I'm seeing in a lot of stories, and it's frustrating. Yeah, emotion is not a substitution for characterization. And I mentioned it earlier, character shifts versus character changes, where this plagued The Acolyte, by the way. The character just goes, I'm going to change to the good side. Yeah. And then a couple episodes later, they're like, I'm going back to the bad side. Nothing really spurned this. They're just changing their positions. This is a very common problem in amateur writing. I used to do it myself a lot. And I used to always think that my character's sudden shift in position was interesting. Well, guess what? It's not. It's not. If your character undergoes real problems and real conflicts, and as a result, they change their mind about something in the world or a person they met, that's character change. And that is almost always extremely satisfying. When you watch on screen a character change, you change. You've seen a model for change. It's one of the most powerful things stories actually deliver, is the model for character change. So when a writer cheats us of this by giving us a character shift where they just change their mind about something, it destabilizes it, because suddenly now we're like, I don't really understand how that character got there. I'm not sure I understand. Most of us will go along with it, but it is a rapid shift in position. Messianic or deified characters. When you create it, like Neo had this problem in The Matrix Reloaded. He became messianic. It was really hard for the writers to know how to handle him in part 2 of The Matrix, because now everyone's like, you're the one. We accept you as the one. You're digital Jesus. And so he's like, thank you. And suddenly they're giving like these like church-like sermons in Zion. And it's like, is this cool? I don't think this is cool anymore. Your character detaches from the rest of us, especially if you deify the character officially and make them into a god. They get detached, and now it's harder for me to relate to that character. Star Wars did a good job of grounding the character. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi, they make fun of how he has to sit on that tree trunk in Return of the Jedi, but they grounded him in a way. They made him a little bit less godlike and a little bit more like Buddy Obi-Wan, who just happens to be a ghost, So deified or messianic characters can be a little detaching and hard to know what to do with, because they are detached by definition from the rest of us in society. You can only do so much with these characters. You usually have to kill them off. Game of Thrones had to kill off the Sparrow. Christianity had a problem with Jesus. How long is this guy can hang out with us if he's just above us all? So the messianic or deified characters is a destabilizing element. And then, of course, mirages and illusions are disorienting. Also, constantly disoriented characters. Characters are always like, what's going on? I don't understand. You know, they're going through some sort of mental anguish here. It gets taxing on us, and we don't even know what they're doing anymore. They're always confused on screen. I'm losing interest in this character. You can make it work. Memento, as long as you center it on that destabilizing aspect. Christopher Nolan actually really loves to do this. Christopher Nolan likes to take one or two of these destabilizing elements and really double down on them. And then you get like Inception. You know, the laws of physics aren't the same. You know, you get some of this. So anyway, I'll skip some of the other ones. There is some, constantly interrupted dialogue. When characters can't finish a conversation because someone's always interrupting them, another sign of bad writing. The writers themselves don't know how to end conversations, so they just interrupt them all the time. I hate that. And then finally, and I'll just talk about two of these, battle sequences. Destabilizing. If you want to destabilize the film during a battle sequence, remove tactical battle plans. Just show us action and you will destabilize the element, because all the action is suddenly confusing and meaningless. You have to. That's why Star Wars, Star Trek, all these shows give us a tactical overview of the battle before showing us the action. You have to do it, because then we could follow the action. Plus, you have to know what's at stake. And usually there's progressive levels. If we Helm's Deep, we know that if this wall falls, we retreat to the keep. Then you retreat to the second keep, and so on. And then lack of a coherent strategy. If you just show military leaders pointing and screaming, we don't know what they're doing. That's not really a military leader. We need to know what the military leader's plan is. What is the strategy? What is the other guy or girl? What is her strategy for countering that? So anyway, these are all destabilizing elements in the story. And Arcane had almost all of these. The writers introduced all of these destabilizing elements. That's why in a small window, it can be satisfying. But as a season, I was like, there's no way this is going to hold up over time, because the more people think about this, the less sense it's going to make. They destabilize the entire story. So when I said I believe that it's a story collapse by Act 3 of season 2, this is what I'm referring to. They introduced too many destabilizing elements, too quick, too fast, and in some scenes, multiple times. There was one scene, I think, in episode 7, where Victor, deified character, is using magical communication language on a robot, which has no free will because it's mind controlled, talking to Jace, who just came out of an abstract landscape. And I was like, that's too much. There's too many things. That's
a great example that helps to really ground the examples you're giving us.
You know the scene I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's talking.
But that just demonstrates it, because, I see what you mean.
Right. You're introducing too many unstable elements, and as a result, the story starts to suffer. In fact, there's a line of dialogue spoken by Victor that exemplifies how you can get yourself really lost even in the dialogue with too many abstractions. Victor goes, "An anomaly festers beneath the hex gate." I'm not really sure what an anomaly is. I don't know how it festers, but it's festering, whatever this is. And it's beneath the hex gate. I don't even really know what that means. In a cave, in a dungeon, in the ground. But an anomaly festers below the hex gate. Very ambiguous dialogue. I believe, doesn't know, he believes, it has the capacity to complete the Doctor's transformation. Oh, how'd you get there? There's an anomaly festering below the hex gate, and you believe it's going to solve the transformation, which is also a magical issue that takes away character autonomy. And then Ambessa's response is, and this will allow you to evolve others. Folks, we're in dialogue that is all abstractions, and the characters don't even make any more sense. And as a viewer, I'm having a real hard time following this dialogue. I just get a general sense that there's something at the hex gate that will help the Doctor, and Ambessa fills us in that. And if he goes, not only will it help the Doctor, it'll help Victor evolve, which means mind control everybody. So we're really lost in the details. Now, some people could say, oh, I followed along perfectly fine. Great. That's great. But as a writer, you probably want to avoid this because the number of people that are going to follow along all this is going to start dropping off rapidly. So anyway,
if anything, that you'll just start to feel a little bit more emotionally disconnected, and you won't really be able to put into words why. But that's probably what it is.
Right, because the writers are and in my opinion, the writers are destabilizing to solve writing problems. Like you said, Brianna, I would have loved to have seen Echo and Jinx. After I saw the dream sequence in an alternate universe, I was like, just show us the real two. They're there. They're both alive. A good writer would take a stable scenario, not a destabilized scenario, a stable situation, put the real Jinx together, and let's see a relationship actually develop. Guess what? I guarantee everybody would love that, especially if it had the same kind of emotional impact as we saw in the multiverse. And I think all the shippers out there would have loved it. I would have loved it. So if you can provide a concrete version of these issues, a stable version, I think you're doing yourself a favor as a writer, and I think you're giving your readers or audience a chance to really stay invested. And by the way, while I was writing all this down, I went back to season 1 and hit play on episode 7. All of these things were absent. It was, in fact, the scene I happened to randomly pick. It was Kate and Vi talking to each other in a room. And I was like, there's nothing destabilizing this scene. And the writers had the courage to stick it out. They talked to each other for like 3 or 4 minutes. And I was invested in the conversation, even though I just jumped into it. So I was like, stabilize your stories, stabilize your scenes. Don't do what they're doing here. And you're probably going to succeed. You'll probably have a successful story if you can do that.